we've got Dele Farotimi, who is an author, he's a lawyer, he was an active participant. Like every other student, he says. Thank you for coming on this morning.
Thank you for having me.
Well, you know, when this day comes year on year, previously, even today, what goes through your mind, having gone through all that on June 12, 1993?
A lot of sadness. Very deep one too, because I think of all the lives that were wasted. I use the word wasted deliberately because this wasn't what we marched for. This is not the democracy my friends bled for. This is not the democracy my generation died for. What we have today is a mockery of democracy.
Why do you say so?
I was afflicted for almost an hour listening to Mr. President rambling on what I would better describe as a budget speech rather than a Democracy Day declaration to the Nigerian people.
But what did you expect on a day
I
like this?
expected, as one of your correspondents who was at Abiola's house, was talking to a core of young people, and they were talking about electoral reform. We have a way of domesticating almost every terminology in Nigeria, and when we talk about democracy, the assumption is always that it's about the worth of a man's vote. The totality of the June 12 day, the day itself, the totality of the principle was about the value of the vote, the sanctity of the right of the citizen to freely express their desire as to how they wish to be ruled and by who. What has happened is that we have taken that today and it's become a mockery. What we call democracy in Nigeria today is essentially a feudal system that exists solely for the benefit of the rulers, and there is practically nothing in it for those who are being ruled. The essence of the state today appears to be the preservation of the ruling class in style.
If I can ask you,
yes, sir.
What were those values of June 12 that you expected 21 years into the Fourth Republic, 27 years after June 12, 1993, we should have adopted?
I expected that by now, at a minimum, the vote will count. That's one. Because that would appear to be the hallmark of anything you call a democracy. But that is not the case in Nigeria today. The vote does not count. The will of the rulers imposed using the instrumentation of force, the police, thugs, and sometimes the courts itself, have become the expresser of the people's will and not necessarily the people's vote. That is on one hand.
Okay, go on.
I also expect that by now, the several questions of nationality and nationhood that have bedeviled Nigeria long before our independence but have been compounded over the years of military rule, that those questions would have been answered. I expect that security should be much better than it is right now, but I regret, it pains me to say that if you place the map of Nigeria on the wall today and you were sticking red pins on the troubled areas of Nigeria, you'll be hard-pressed to find any part that is left without a red pin, because Nigeria is essentially a state at war with itself. I expect that by now, the right of the citizen should be a foregone conclusion. It shouldn't be something for which I have to beg a policeman. We shouldn't be talking end SARS.
One of the reasons we are talking about June 12, 1993
yes, sir.
Today,
yes, sir.
Even in the Fourth Republic, is that many people pushed for the actualization of their will. You say that you call them rulers. I thought they were leaders, but you probably want to explain that as well. Now, that the citizens don't get their will, but the citizens got their will post-June 12 election because they insisted that government, that the military needed to go, and it was as a result of that the military stepped aside for the Fourth Republic. So how are the citizens today fighting for their own will?
Thank you. when your correspondent was speaking by Skype with there was a young lady, and she said, oh, today's youth are so focused on existence that they are not even, most of them do not even understand what June 12 stands for. What she said is a symptom, and I would like to explain. The Nigerian is linked to what I said earlier related to rulers as opposed to leaders. Leaders have destinations in view to which they are leading the people. Rulers invariably almost always live in the moment. They don't have any vision behind which to mobilize the people. The Nigerian state has weaponized poverty against its people. And when a people are necessarily concentrated solely on finding what to eat, what to drink, where to live, how to survive the several security challenges, and the many existential questions that you are asked just because you live in Nigeria, the chances are that those people are not likely to have the time to question the quality of governance that they are receiving or misrule, as the case might be.
Doesn't that also beg the question of how those rulers,
yes,
that you call them,
yes,
got into the place in the first place? Because they were elected.
Okay, let me explain this. Every system is designed to produce something or the other. So if you have designed the factory process and it is meant to produce cocoa paste at the end of the day, it is almost impossible, unless you re-engineer that system, for the system to produce water or to begin to produce sanitary pads. Is a function of what each system is designed to produce. Nigeria has 36 states, 774 local governments. The cost of governance, as determined by the structure, the governance structure set up by the Constitution that says we the people, where we the people never had a word to say concerning that Constitution. The maintenance of the superstructure of governance is too costly, and the system has assured that all you ever do is to maintain the governance system without concomitant spendings going to the provision of infrastructure. So what you have at the end of the day is that you have 15 million children of school age wandering the streets of Nigeria, and Mr. President is talking about spending money on education. He's talking about building bridges. Of what use are bridges and roads and trains that you have built when you have failed to build the most important segment of your nation? Did I say nation? Of your state, the citizens. Nigerians cannot even be validly called citizens because citizenship endures on equality. When you now have multiple levels of citizenship, to the point where the content of a man's citizenship is devalued, to the point where the policeman can simply point a gun at his head and shoot him without accountability, you then begin to ask yourself, exactly what sort of people, what sort of citizens, exactly what kind of votes do we really have? When you vote in Lagos, we all vote in Lagos and we speak all this Dogon Turenchi in Lagos. Go outside Lagos into the parts of Nigeria. He's talking about peace in the Niger Delta. What peace? The peace so that you can pay rent to warlords, so that you can have your oil rigs. What about the poor man and woman in the Niger Delta?
Okay. Well, let's get across to Louis Odion, who is the Senior Technical Assistant on Media to the President. Okay, well, we'll get across to him much later. You're going to ask him.
I would actually like to get to Mr. Louis Odion because he was also a principal actor at the time. And he would probably speak to some of the things that happened at the time, especially what the media did, back then. You would also probably talk about some of the activities of the media at the time.
I'm able to, yeah.
How strong was it?
The media is only ever as strong as the citizenry. We were talking about a time when, even when I was in secondary school, I would buy newspapers.
That doesn't happen today.
Because the people have been focused on existential considerations. If all a man does...
Let's explore... I'm sorry.
Yeah, please.
Let's explore that for a bit. You didn't have to have a parent or anybody breathe down on you.
Yeah.
educate you, school you about June 12. You knew some of these things.
I was there, I
before
voted.
June 12. Exactly. The younger people of those days, 15 years, 14 years, 13 years, many of them were out on the streets in the post June 12 elections because they saw that things weren't going the way they were supposed to go. But today you saw what our correspondent went out to do, how they went out to do.
Yes.
They are not even interested. Many of them don't even know. These young people don't even know 20 years ago a governor was in Lagos. They don't even know him anymore.
It is not by accident. That is not an accident. Things happen deliberately. When I was growing up, there was a premium placed on knowledge. Nigeria was a place where you could rise above the class into which you were born by sheer virtue of the fact that you had enough brains, the state provided enough space, and you could actualize yourself.
Wouldn't you also lay some of these, some of the faults,
Yes.
not say blame, some of the faults of this inadequate knowledge or education for the youth on the people to whom they were looking up?
There is no one to see up there. They are all down there. The people you call leaders, whom I call rulers, which one of them really would anyone employ to run a private industry?
No, I'm talking about parents, guardians.
What parent? I'll give you an example. For me to come to your studio this morning, I had to be awake by 5 o'clock. The amount of man-hour that parents spend in traffic, going to work and back from work, what ends up happening is that the children are left to their own devices because parents are engaged in existential consideration. How much did any one of our parents here paid in school fees? The bulk of the payments being received by anyone in my generation goes towards the education of their children because the state has abandoned education. So what you have is that the average Nigerian is constantly on a rat race. When a man is impoverished, the poverty does not begin materially. It starts here. It starts up here.
But this poverty issue that you raised didn't start today, didn't start 4 years ago, didn't start 5 years ago. It's a progressive thing. Didn't start 20 years ago.
It's just accelerated, particularly more so with the onslaught of feudalism in Nigeria. What has happened is that people have been balkanized into classes. You either have or you don't have. When every time the only thing the man is thinking about is how to survive, how does he eat, what does he feed, the totality of his focus is on survival. I'm not excusing the fact that you have intellectual decay. But intellectual decay only happens when first thing we used to talk when we started growing up, we were talking about infrastructural decay because there were infrastructures to decay. The infrastructures finished. We've decayed the totality of the infrastructure now. What started since about 10 years back is that the quality of the human mind started decaying.
But do we have to wait for young people to remind us that we need to do something about the Electoral Act? Because now, looking at how we finished the last elections and where we are, because we did ask this question of the members of the National Assembly yesterday, and they said, well, look, there are procedures, there are certain things they needed to do hitting the ground running. But does that then, because they say, look, that doesn't mean that they won't address this matter. What do you think we should be doing by now about it?
The Electoral Act, when we talk incremental changes, is one of the things that you really need to look at. But I really don't believe that it is the Electoral Act itself that is the problem.
Even if we start with electronic voting? I mean, next election.
When we talk about electronic voting, let's first of all get something clear. First, we were going to be using, what was that slide that INEC said was that this card, biometrics and all of that. But there are serious evidences of the manipulations and frauds that went on in places where your cameras don't visit. And the fact remains that by the time the thing enters the judicial process, it becomes a toss-up. Fact is this: before you can begin to talk about electoral reforms, you must first of all respect the sanctity of a vote. That has nothing to do with laws. when the rulers have ab initio made up their minds that the vote of the man on the street would not count because they do not believe themselves accountable to that man.
But don't you think that if we improve the process by ensuring that, well, at least to a large extent, the voting becomes electronic, where the chances of manipulation is reduced to a great extent, wouldn't that help in any way to endanger confidence for voters?
For as long as our structure remains one where power remains unaccountable, and I'll tell you why it's unaccountable. When our fathers sat down and actually negotiated Nigeria, it was a parliamentary democracy. For you to be voted for, the people must have known you. It wasn't a function of money. Government has very little business with the regimentation of who should run or not run. The people who are the ones who knows who they know or they don't know. But when you now have a situation where we now practice what we call a presidential system, where the person you are even voting for is not related to you, you don't know him. He probably comes around, shares his rice. They're hungry. So he shares his rice. Even Ekiti went a little further. We have stomach infrastructure. We have a new word for it. The only time a man requires stomach infrastructure is because he's starving. It doesn't even have any value for the vote. So you bring your 5,000, your 10,000, depending on where the votes are being counted. You bring your rice, the salt, and the different things that they have given. Because the vote has no value to the man in the first place. His life is not changed, whether it's the PDP, the APC, PPP, PUPU, whatever they call themselves. It's the same family.
You just mentioned a number of parties now, but one of the high points, one of the highlights of the June 12, 1993 election was the mode of the party system. It was a two-party system. There were 13 parties that were proscribed, and they all had to merge into, a two-party system.
There's something about the elections of 1993 that we must not gloss over, and that is the fact that it was an unusual event. The people were determined to get rid of Babangida and the military. Yes, it was a two-party system, forced on Nigerians by Babangida and his many experiments at political engineering. For all his worth, if you even check out the history of Nigeria, there has always been a tendency to gravitate towards a two-party system. That's always been the Nigerian predilection. Even when you had three parties based on regions, eventually you find that coalitions were being formed. They would have emerged naturally. It's always the Nigerian situation. Even the American democracy we say we copy. They have a multi-party democracy, but there are two dominant parties. Every presidential system eventually begins to gravitate towards the tribalism that breaks them down into two. That's why you have the Republicans on one hand, you have the Democrats on the other hand.
Wouldn't that happen in a parliamentary system?
It might. But the parliamentary system actually allows more room for multi-party democracy, because in reality, if it's a parliamentary system, it then means that all I really need is to be known within my constituency. I might then get into the parliament and become part of a voting bloc or align myself to a political platform. But the argument really is that in the kind of country in which we live, where you have many tribes and ethnicities, religious differences, and what have you, it would have been much better to retain the negotiated agreements that had always existed in this space.
Which was?
A parliamentary democracy. It's cheaper. It doesn't allow for this farce where
what about the quality of government? Governance.
See, they brought presidential system to Nigeria in 1979, a consequence of the Constitutional Assembly of 1977, 77. And here is the thing. It is not by accident that the presidential system wasn't what was voted in that assembly. It was forced on them by the Obasanjo government.
Couldn't the argument also have been that the parliamentary system came to us because of our previous colonial masters?
But here is the thing. You can't run away from your history. Those same colonial masters, introducing the parliamentary system, also held constitutional conferences from Ibadan all the way to London. Several constitutional conferences were held. There was the Willings Commission on the right of the minorities as well. And the negotiated agreement agreed as between all the constituent parts of this country before independence was that we should have federating regions, 1. 2, it should be a parliamentary system. That parliamentary system was what was in operation all through the years when we were practicing before the independence. And it was what was in place until the January coup of 1966. So the point is that if we have ever really tried on anything or practiced anything or sought to domesticate any sort of democracy, it was the parliamentary democracy. We became the beneficiaries of a unitary system masquerading as a presidential democracy by the grace of Obasanjo and his cohort, and again by the grace of Abdul Salam the second time around. Nigerians have never sat down anywhere to agree to be ruled in a presidential system predicated on 36 states, 774 local governments.
Are you asking for us to renegotiate our system of government?
It is inevitable. We can keep lying to ourselves and be telling ourselves we are in a democracy. I don't have to join in lying to myself. It's self-delusional to call what we have right now a democracy. It is not.